Hi, everyone.
We are live. This is night both 12 and 13 of Zappadan.
Yes.
We took a night off.
We ended up deciding to have a Saturday. It's been just a long, stressful couple of weeks for us. So we decided we'll go out, we'll enjoy our Saturday, and then Sunday we will come back with a dub. Can we tell them already?
A double album.
Double album.
Technically a triple if you count the number of LPs involved.
Correct.
But we're doing the whole of Joe's Garage.
Yay.
Acts 1, 2, and 3.
Yep.
All right. Here is the cover. By today's standards, it might be considered a little problematic. Here's all I'm going to say about this, and I'm just going to move on from it. Frank Zappa didn't lose any of his many black friends after releasing this album. Johnny Guitar Watson continued to collaborate with him. So did Ike Willis. So did Ray White.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think at any minute would those guys have put up with a racist band leader. Certainly not Johnny Guitar Watson.
Definitely not. And I think the important thing to note is what I think he's trying to say there is that if you know the story of Joe's Garage, if you've read along with the lyrics and the liner notes and you know what the story is about, it's about that anybody can become part of the machine and anybody can become enslaved to the machine. So I think what he's saying is he is trying to make a commentary on that. He's holding a mob. So I think he is trying to say that anybody can become enslaved to the machine.
Absolutely. He is trying to impart a message, but I feel that in today's contemporary climate, the immediate thought to jump to is that this is a racist image.
Right. And
it is a comment on racism.
Yes.
The image itself does not project racism. Frank Zappa did not project racism. He commented on racism, and he commented on it plenty.
Agreed.
I'd rather not alienate people by continuing to explain to death something that was totally acceptable nearly 40 years ago, but is now a socio-political minefield.
Let's move on.
All right, so that is the cover art to Joe's Garage Act 1. It's also reflected here with Joe's Garage Acts 2 and 3. I don't have this one on vinyl. The sleeve itself is quite impressive. We might come in a little closer for these in just a tick, but it's got the full set of lyrics, the full libretto. This is some pretty scary shit. I'm not going to mince words here. This is not the cuddly Frank Zappa singing about don't eat the yellow snow or moving to Montana. Scientific medical images coupled with images of wealth and fortune, this Dada imagery, what looks like Moses and the Commandments.
I do think this is one of his most important works because it is so serious and because it has such a strong message.
And I would say the packaging lets you know this is meant to be taken about as seriously as you can.
Definitely.
You know what this looks like?
What?
This looks like the inside of a Dead Kennedys album.
I agree.
But 5 years early, So we'll go through the libretto and we'll talk about things, but it's such a vast work.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it might be best to break it down into two parts. Joe's Garage Act 1 and then Joe's Garage Acts 2 and 3. Before we separate the two, though, it tells a story, obviously, as the name implies. It's a rock opera. Mm-hmm. The rock opera is about a kid named Joe. He lives in a world where music has been made illegal. For playing music, the suggested rehabilitation is that he goes to the church. While at the church, he meets a girl who blows him, and then she runs away with a rock band. Mm-hmm. He is then heartbroken and then gets a sexually transmitted disease.
Right.
The young lady then becomes a groupie and becomes another type of victim of the music industry. Mm-hmm. And then that's the end of Act 1.
Right.
Joe is despondent. And then perhaps we should leave it there for now.
We can do that.
And then we'll go into Acts 2 and 3 after that.
Yeah.
So.
We're jumping in?
We're jumping in.
Okay.
I'll let you get us started. And
awesome.
Hi,
Mo's coming over to say hi. So the show, because it is a show, it's theatrical. The rock opera opens with you meeting what's called the central scrutinizer, which is basically a figure that's supposed to represent the state. It is this overarching body described as like a robot, like a flying saucer type robot, and it. Say hi, everybody. Basically, the central scrutinizer makes all the laws. And
He's judge, jury, executioner,
right.
and God.
So it's been decided that music is like the worst crime of all. So you can't make or create music because it leads to other crimes. And it's a commentary on, there's a concept that Frank believed in where if everything is made illegal.
Oh, we will, rather than explain it, we'll just read it.
We can read that.
All right. Desperate nerds in high offices all over the world have been known to enact the most disgusting pieces of legislation in order to win votes, or in places where they don't get to vote, to control unwanted forms of mass behavior. Environmental laws were not passed to protect our air and water. They were passed to get votes. Green New Deal?
Mm-hmm.
Seasonal anti-smut campaigns are not conducted to rid our communities of moral rot. They are conducted to give an aura of saintliness to the office seekers who demand them. If a few key phrases are thrown into any speech, as the expert advisors explain to these various heads of state, votes will roll in, bucks will roll in, and most importantly, power will be maintained by the groovy guy or gal who gets the most media coverage for his sleaze. Naturally, their friends in various businesses will do okay too. All governments perpetuate themselves through the daily commission of acts which a rational person might find to be stupid, dangerous, or both. Naturally, our government is no exception. For instance, if the president, any of them, went on TV and sat there with the flag in the background, or maybe a rustic scene on a little backdrop plus the flag, and stared sincerely into the camera and told everybody that all energy problems and all inflationary problems had been traced to and could be solved by the abolition of music, chances are that most people would believe him and think that the illegalization of this obnoxious form of noise pollution would be a small price to pay for the chance to buy gas like the good old days. No way? Could never happen? Records are made out of oil. Hey, and so are CD cases.
Mm-hmm.
And the devices you play them on. All those big rock shows go from town to town in fuel-gobbling 45-foot trucks, and when they get there, they use up enormous amounts of electrical energy with their lights, amplifiers, PA systems, smoke machines, and all those synthesizers. Look at all the plastic they got in them, and the guitar picks, you name it. Joe's Garage is a stupid story about how the government is going to try to do away with music, a prime cause of unwanted mass behavior. It's sort of like a really cheap kind of high school play, the way it might have been done 20 years ago, with all the sets made out of cardboard boxes and poster paint. It's also like those lectures that local narcs used to give, where they show you a display of all the different ways you can get wasted, with the pills leading to the weed, leading to the needle, etc., etc. If the plot of the story seems just a little bit preposterous, and if the idea of the central scrutinizer enforcing laws that haven't been passed yet makes you giggle, just be glad you don't live in one of the cheerful little countries where, at this very moment, music is either severely restricted or, as it is in Iran and still is now, totally illegal. That's the intro to Joe's Garage Act 1 before we hear the first note in the libretto, before the introduction of the central scrutinizer.
Yeah, so that is kind of the idea that I was talking about earlier, was that there's a concept where everything is made illegal. And it's kind of scary because it feels like that's a little bit true now, where there's these laws that encroach upon everybody's civil liberties and civil rights.
But more importantly, that even the most nobly intended seeming of laws, such as environmental protection, it's never actually enacted upon by the government to protect the people or to protect the planet, but to curry favor and to remain in power. It's a bold commentary on our political system.
Agreed.
Now, the opening track, Introduction of the Central Scrutinizer, it serves as a narrative. It introduces the central scrutinizer, basically outlining the landscape, like I just described to you, musically.
Right.
A fascinating little bit. This was explained to me by Arthur Barrow. If you're musically inclined, this is a good chance to get out the record, get out the album, listen to it really closely. This tune, which has mostly exposition on it as the lyrics, the music, it is a remake of My Guitar Wants to Kill Your Mama. It had first been recorded in 69, 70, and Frank wanted to re-record it for a 10-year anniversary with his new band, which at the time had Vinnie Colaiuta, Arthur Barrow, Tommy Mars, Peter Wolf, probably leaving a couple, Ed Mann,
Right.
Ray White, Ike Willis. So that was going to be the B-side, and the A-side was going to be this track detailing the history of pop music, inspired by stories they told backstage one night about their time being in garage bands. So we get this remake of My Guitar Wants to Kill Your Mama. Listen closely. You can sing the music over it. It even stops right where it says, I can't take it. That same bit. So anyway, the song that was inspired by all this talks about garage bands became Joe's Garage. And I believe it was Art Barrow who was in the band that had a 57 Chevy.
Right.
And
I love the innocence of the song.
It's so happy. This is a very happy song.
It's really happy and just reminiscent of everybody who had a band when you were in middle school or high school. And
it took me back. You were in a band too, right?
Absolutely. And it's just so fun. And like, it's kind of, I love that it starts out so innocent and so relatable, because then it just goes downhill so quickly.
Right. It's also a doo-wop song.
It is a doo-wop song.
Da, 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 da. It is sort of a history of music, but it also details the story of just about every one-hit wonder who came and went through the music industry.
Right.
A guy from a company we can't name said we ought to take this pen, and then they get screwed over. Now, one thing I like about this song is it reinforces very quickly the idea that the world in which Joe lives is a totalitarian society. We're introduced right away to the central scrutinizer, right? And then at the end of that first track, he does the airport announcement. The white zone is for loading and unloading only.
Right.
It becomes a running joke, and on stage it was a running joke during this time as well. So at the end of Joe's Garage, the song, as Joe is cursing the fact that his music career is over, he's not going to go anywhere with it, the contract screwed him. He said, well, I guess you only have a chance to play a song that goes like this. And then music has evolved. All this new stuff's coming along. Pretty soon, it won't be long until we're dancing too. And then it segues right back into the white zone announcement, suggesting that it won't be long before all we have is the music provided to us by the state, by the central scrutinizer. Then the neighbor, the mom, calls the cops, like all good white women do. And what is the recommended rehabilitation for Joe and his band of hellions?
Joe's to go to prison.
Not yet. Not yet.
Oh, right. He goes to Catholic school first.
He goes to Catholic school. What is it they say there?
Oh.
So one of our friendly counselors gave him a donut and told him to stick to church-oriented social activities.
So you're right. First he goes to Catholic school. Later he goes to jail.
So then he gets sent to Catholic school, and while he's there, where he's supposed to be rehabilitated, taught goodness, taught good morals, what's the scene at the CYO?
Oh gosh, it's a little raucous.
A lot of teen sex.
A lot of teen sex at the CYO.
There's a lot of stuff going on here on this song. Catholic Girls made its way onto the posthumous compilation Have I Offended Someone for a reason. Now, this is also a response to the heat that he took for earlier that year recording the song Jewish Princess, which people falsely accused him of anti-Semitism, when in fact he was simply critiquing a certain type of person.
Yes.
Same with Catholic Girls. Frank himself was Catholic, and this was partially a response to show that he could make fun of himself culturally, but also to expose the hypocrisies in the cultural identity with which he grew up.
Right. Like Joe's supposed to be having to be sent to Catholic school to like be on the straight and narrow. And
for all the Sunday school stuff to become a better person.
Right. But there's like all this raucous activity going on.
One of the most disturbing lines is Father Riley is a fairy, but it don't bother Mary. There's like 3 layers of concern there. The first right away is that the priest is known to be sexually active and gay, that it's no issue to Mary. We don't know that there's a character named Mary yet in the story.
Right.
If those familiar with the church hear that and go, Father Riley's a fairy, but it don't bother Mary. That's actually a pretty woke nod to the fact that God does not care if you're gay or not.
Right.
That's a
You
little
think it's
progressive
about-
slip of Frank Zappa's religious beliefs.
Right.
It don't bother Mary that Father Riley's a fairy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, at the same time, the entendre is it also doesn't bother Mary, the character, who we meet at the end of the song.
Right.
The idea being that he poses no threat to the young girls who go to the CYO. So there's a suggestion there that this priest is a sex predator.
Oh.
And sex predation becomes a theme throughout the album.
Right.
Sex is a big theme throughout the album.
Mm-hmm.
And the hypocrisy of the institution of the church, that this is a solution given to this kid as a counseling intervention.
Right.
And it ends up making him worse, because what happens is he meets Mary, they become boyfriend, girlfriend, and it says at the end of the song, they sit together, hold hands, and think pure thoughts.
Right.
But one night, Mary wasn't there. And that brings us into the next song.
Okay, so this song I want to preface by saying that it's one that may not have aged well, I think.
Why do you think not?
Because
Should we start with the title?
yeah, so the title is Crew Slut. And I have no issue with the word slut. I think a lot of sex workers have been reclaiming that word proudly, and I fully support that. But I think in this context, it's used, she's not a sex worker, so she's not like, there's no exchange of like money for survival because it's her job. It's that it's like, she's trying to get into, she's a groupie. She's trying to get into concerts.
But it introduces the world Mary lives in.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, all you girls in these industrial towns.
Right.
I'll bet you're getting sick and tired of all these local clowns. I grew up in a small industrial town. It's a shitty place. And unless you want to end up on the assembly line or a housefrau, there are no futures. There's no viable future in a place like Seymour, Indiana. John Mellencamp sang about it with pride out of stupidity. It's a dump. It's a cesspool. And there's thousands of towns like it all across America where there's nothing going on, where the culture's been taken away from it.
Right.
Where it's like the town in Footloose, where music's already sort of illegal in one way or another.
Right. So she's supposed to be like a townie in a kind of a crummy town.
Repressed.
Right.
Suffering small town Christian fascist repression.
Mm-hmm. And the bus is how she's going to get out of the town.
Right. By joining the crew, by joining the roadie and company. And it's sexually explicit with its depictions of what the future holds for her. That she is there to be a fuck object.
Right.
And little else.
Right.
To keep her mouth shut, her butt on the seat until she's needed.
Yeah. And she gets left eventually. She gets left in Florida, I think it is.
After a wet t-shirt contest that she enters and then wins. Now that brings us right into the next track. There's some fucked up stuff going on in that wet t-shirt contest as well. Yeah. This is based off of a real story where Frank, Terry Bozzio, and Patrick O'Hearn went to a bar and there was a wet t-shirt contest that night. Now, in our culture now in 2018, we're pretty familiar with the concept. In 1979, this was a relatively novel thing. So Frank just couldn't believe himself. I mean, he was the father of a daughter, and by the time this album came out, his second daughter, Diva, was born.
Right.
And his fourth kid. He was such a feminist.
Yeah.
And people look at some of his songs, like Bobby Brown Goes Down, Dynamo Hum. They misinterpret it. They think that there's sexism going on. Wet T-Shirt Night is a critique of the objectification of women by the world that has been so heavily dominated by patriarchy.
And just to add on to that, I think there's something really important about the notion that when you're talking about something or mentioning something, it's not necessarily advocacy for or against something. So him having a song called Wet T-Shirt Contest doesn't mean that he is like, oh yeah, I love going to those and seeing boobs and all that stuff. Like, that's not necessarily what that means.
Same also with the blackface on the cover.
Exactly.
His refusal to shy away from using racially charged language in songs about race.
Yeah.
So, yeah, good point. I appreciate that you made that point. Great musical arrangement here. There's a lot of cool passages that, let's just say Uncle Frank would call them statistically dense. Lots of dots on those lines. This one in particular quotes from Mo and Herb's Vacation. Mm-hmm. Not this Mo Cohen, wife of Herb Cohen, Frank's old manager. Mo and her's vacation is a response to where Frank's missing money went.
Uh-oh.
Gag order. So, cool song.
Yeah.
There's a real dark quip that's made when Mary enters the contest. She says she wants to get home, and then Frank is the MC. Now in the libretto, it says that the MC at the Wet T-shirt night is Father Riley, who has since been defrocked.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of dark shit going on.
Yeah.
She says, I got to get home. And he says to her, right, your daddy's waiting for you back in the tool shed. So it is suggested heavily there that she has been the victim of incestual sexual assault.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I mean, there's all sorts of connotations there.
Yeah. And that lets you know Frank's position on it, that this is, she's obviously been through trauma and the trauma's not been dealt with. And this is the result of how I think this is like him actually being a feminist and him saying that like we basically dealt with this girl's trauma by sending her to Catholic school, which actually made her even more repressed. And
so at the first chance to leave and hop on the first bus that rolled into town saying next destination anywhere but here.
Yeah.
Who wouldn't take it?
Yeah.
Who at least wouldn't be tempted to take it. There is a morality play here, but the morality being discussed is not the morality that is considered right in the universe of Joe's Garage. Yeah. So, Wet T-shirt night ends with Home is Where the Heart Is. On the bus, we get a Xenocronous guitar solo. Now, we talked about this when we covered Zoodle Lures, but in case you're just now tuning in for the first time, all right, sweetie, let's get you on the floor.
Now he's just sitting at our feet staring at us.
Well, he might need
He can just hang out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So on the bus, we talked about this on Zoodle Lures. Frank started this thing called the Xenocronous guitar solo. Xeno, X-E-N-O, meaning foreign, and then C-H-R-O-N-Y, chrony, like time, chronos. It's a live guitar solo slapped onto a studio track that had been recorded by the band. The reason there are so many live guitar tracks, Frank called it the Ampex guitar. You might need to go potty. The reason Frank called it the Ampex guitar is these were the live tracks dubbed onto studio recordings, and Ampex was the recording technology he used for his soundboard. So the Ampex guitar does the solo called On the Bus. I believe it's called On the Bus here. Oh, right. So on the CD, it is entitled On the Bus. On the record, it's entitled Toad O Line. Toad-O being a reference to the name of the band she runs off with. Say it fast.
Mm-hmm.
Toto.
Toto line.
Toto.
Oh, Toto.
And then, yes, Toto line. Love isn't always on time. Is it Toto who does that song?
I don't know.
But that's the lyric that he's quoting at the beginning of On the Bus.
I'm going to Google it.
Do you need to go outside?
I can take him out.
Yeah. See if he needs to go.
You want to go outside? We just went out that long ago. Let me keep talking now.
Okay. By the way, hi, Aaron. Pound for a Brown. Don't know if this album. Just tying to that. Yeah, we were on a tirade for the first 20 minutes to just run through Act 1 since it's so dense, narrative-wise. On the Bus then ends...
Take him outside. Sure. I'll be back.
So On the Bus starts as that guitar solo quoting the song Love Isn't Always on Time. Then it segues into some narration by the central scrutinizer, establishing that while Mary is lost in the rock world, Joe has wound up dating around, and where is it she works? Jack in the Box?
Jack in the Box.
Lucille, Joe's new girlfriend, works at Jack in the Box and gives him an unpronounceable disease. This effectively ends that track, although I think the divisions on the CD are not quite right. Oh, they'll be back, don't worry. It builds up into this really gorgeously orchestrated number called Why Does It Hurt When I Pee? The song itself, lyrically, it's goofy. It's a 12-bar blues. Why does it hurt when I pee? Why does it hurt when I pee? I don't want no doctor to stick no needle in me. Oh, why does it hurt when I pee? Inspired by a roadie, we'll talk about him in just a second. That combination of high and low art that you have going on here with this song. Alexa will probably have something to say about this too. But you have these really dumb lyrics about my balls feel like a pair of maracas. I got it from the toilet seat. Just lowbrow humor. It's literal potty humor. It's about getting a spot on your dick. So why does it hurt? Why does it hurt when I pee? That's a good name for a modem. We call ours idiot box. But why does it hurt when I pee? That's clever. All right. So that mix of high and low art, you have perhaps the most base of subject matters. Sickness coming out of your dick. It's pretty foul. Musically, it is about as orchestrated as a rock song can get. Gorgeous melodic passages, big vocal things in the middle bridge. We're talking about Why Does It Hurt When I Pee, that mix of high and low art.
Oh, I love that.
What's your take on that? Of that sort of blend of literal toilet humor, and then it's a symphonic rock track. I mean, it sounds like it could have been on a Led Zeppelin album.
Yeah.
It sounds like the last minute of Stairway to Heaven.
So the first thing I want to say, slow down, everybody. The first thing I want to say is that I think it's very interesting that his first sexual encounter results in a venereal disease.
Could he tell Frank was Catholic?
Because that is the rhetoric so often in like abstinence-only education is like, don't have sex because you're gonna get a disease and your dick's gonna fall off.
Again, I grew up in Indiana. It's abstinence only, and consequently, there's a ton of pregnant middle schoolers there.
Yeah.
That's sort of the ironic twist. But
right.
I was told so many times, once, and you run the risk of pregnancy.
Right.
Once, your dick will fall off.
Exactly.
Once, you will get. A woman at this youth conference very sternly said to me about genital warts, "These are warts on your penis, and they have to be removed by surgery." And I was like, well, all right, I'll just be sure to not get them.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that's so fascinating. I love Why Does It Hurt When I Pee? The vocals are out of this world. His voice is so crazy.
We'll talk about the musicians once we're done getting through the narrative.
Yeah,
but
I love
wonderful playing there.
I love that it is a mix of high and low art. It's a beautifully orchestrated song. It's so catchy, and yes, it's called Why Does It Hurt When I Pee? Because he has a venereal disease and it hurts to pee. And
yet when you strip it down, take the orchestration away from it, it's just a 12-bar blues.
Yeah.
AAB, AAB, AAB. Act one ends with Lucille Has Messed My Mind Up. And Lucille Has Messed My Mind Up itself is an old tune. This is where we start to get into self-referential territory, but internally self-referential. So in the sleeve to Joe's Garage, what does it say here? Joe is so disoriented by his disease. He goes in the other room and plays the title cut from an old Jeff Simmons album and sings along with it. Hey, Jeff Simmons, we know that name. Bass player with the Mothers, Mark II. He's the guy you hear on Chunga's Revenge. His song, Lucille Has Messed My Mind Up, was the title track to his 1970 album. I think it came out on Straight Records, produced by Frank, with Lamar Brewster, guest guitar player, as which is Frank by another name, on the original Lucille Has Messed My Mind Up. Now that version originally was like a 12/8 sort of like New Orleans style. Ba, 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 ba. Really nice little beat. Here on Joe's Garage Act 1, it is a reggae tune.
Right. And I think Lucille Has Messed My Mind Up is interesting because Standing Alone, it is kind of just a straight love song. Like, I'm going crazy for this woman. You know, I really love her. Like, she's got me going crazy. But in like the context of the greater story of Joe's Garage, when you're like, oh, she gave him an STD, and there's.
Well, the other thing is that the song itself is about an acid trip. Lucille Has Messed My Mind Up.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So, but yeah, totally. It's about this other thing, and then we have Frank doing something he doesn't do often. And I think this is only a Simmons tune. I don't think Frank co-wrote it, unlike Wonderful Wino, which is on Zoot Allures. But we have pathos.
Right.
He's sitting there late at night bemoaning his ex-girlfriend, and he misses her. What you trying to do to me?
Right.
And it's a beautiful song. Oh, God, it's beautiful. It's on our repertoire of songs we play.
Yeah, I love that one.
Yeah. That does mark the end of Act 1, aside from a spoken postlude from the scrutinizer, where he says, indeed, Joe's mind is messed up, and the solution is that he will go to the First Church of Appliantology. So let's pause there and let's talk a little bit about beyond the music, or just beyond the lyrics, the instrumentation, musical highlights, some personnel stuff. And yes, Aaron said that he admires that we give shout outs to the personnel. I think it's vital.
Yeah.
We've both been in bands. I understand what it's like to play with other musicians and just how that creativity rubs off on one another. And Frank, although the band bore his name and he was a solo act, it was a truly collaborative environment. Right. And each player brought energy to the ensemble that he loved. And this group in particular, I believe it was around this time Frank had the band that he called his Rock and Teenage Combo, because he began to recruit younger musicians coming fresh out of the conservatory. So we're talking musicians around 23, 25 at the most. And then some were even younger. In the case of Steve Vai, who enters the picture just after Joe's Garage comes out. He's 17 years old. He blows Frank's mind because he sends him a stack of transcriptions and says, hey, I just transcribed all of your guitar solos, or something like that. Or I transcribed Inca Roads. And he goes, holy shit, I'm impressed, but you're a kid. I'm not taking a kid on the road with me. Come back in 2 years. And he says, well, actually, wait, never mind. While you're waiting, here's an album of guitar solos, what became known as Shut Up and Play Your Guitar. While you're aging, right, you mind just sitting back and transcribing these for me? And just the dynamism that came with every member in his group, whether it was Jimmy Carl Black, Ike Willis, George Duke, these onstage inside jokes that you would get. Terry Bozzio was the same. Vinny Colaiuta used to crack Frank up by doing like seal calls and stuff. So I do want to show the rare picture of a Zappa band lineup. This is from the 2007 issue of Buffalo, which was recorded in 1980. Now, the guys in the middle, aside from Steve Vai on the end there and then Bob Harris right beneath my finger, these guys here were all on the Joe's Garage album. And from left to... So here we have Arthur Barrow, bass player, Vinny Colaiuta, the drummer, Tommy Mariano, a.k.a. Tommy Mars, the keyboardist, that guy, Ike Willis, and Ray White. Awesome band. I can't say enough how cool of a guy Art Barrow is, and Alexa had the honor of meeting him too.
Yeah, really nice guy. So down to earth. He had a lot of great stories about Frank and about being on the road, and it was nice because a lot of what you read about Frank is that he was actually he ran a tight ship.
He was a taskmaster.
Yeah, he was a taskmaster, and he ran a tight ship, and it was nice to hear from someone who was actually there that, like, yes, while it was an incredibly professional environment, that it was also one that had a lot of levity to it as well.
I think they worked hard and they played hard.
Yeah.
But I think they worked more than they played, for sure.
I agree.
So yeah, Frank does have a reputation as being a taskmaster, but for the musicians who were professional musicians, really the conservatory trained crowd were made for Zappa's band because of the discipline. You can't always be strung out all the time and be a great musician.
Yeah. Should we move on to...
Let's see, is there anything else we want to say about Act 1?
I'll say that Act 1 moves really quickly in terms of the story.
Yes.
And then Acts 2 and 3 is like a lot more drawn out. You know, he's...
Agreed. We'll get into that in a second.
Okay.
But yes, it's very dense as far as the narrative goes. It does seem more like an assembly of songs that tells a cohesive story, and it does. It's a pretty tight 50-minute listen. In doing research on this album years ago, I did a whole chapter about Joe's Garage for my master's thesis. I interviewed Art Barrow, and we talked for about 5 hours over the phone, corresponded over email, got all sorts of insight to the production of the album. There's plenty of stories that I don't have time to share, a few that I've been sworn to secrecy not to share, but this is a cool album. This was his first time back in a recording studio after a few years due to the ongoing litigation he had with an unnamed record company. that kept him from recording new material. That's why you have all these live guitar solos that are xenachronized onto studio tracks.
Mhm.
He didn't have the time to record the solos in the studio. So, yes, let's move on to Act 2.
Sounds good.
Here's the cover art, as we've seen before. Now, there's a little poem that I'll read after, but it does act as sort of a precursor to where this album is headed in terms of the narrative and really sort of the punchline. And it's the concept of total criminalization. We'll get to that in a minute, but we start with A Token of My Extreme. So
He's in the cult.
Zappadan, Night 13.
Now he's in the cult.
So now Joe has joined a cult, the First Church of Appliantology, headed by a guy named L. Ron Hoover.
What's that supposed to sound
Now, whether
like?
or not this is based off of any sort of contemporary 20th century American religion that was run out of California and is still an organized crime syndicate is beyond me. I'm not sure if it's based off of anything real. I'm led to understand any resemblance is strictly coincidental. So, Alexa, what is it? Alexa, what does it mean to be a latent appliance fetishist?
Oh my God.
You have nothing to fear, my son.
What does that mean?
A person who refuses to admit to his or herself that sexual gratification can only be achieved through the means of machines. I think there's a commentary on technocracy here.
Right.
And the emergent field of technocracy. This was just years before Apple, IBM becoming a household name. So there's sort of a prediction of the future here.
Right. So they're talking about these sex robots.
But also that they're turning to the church to address a sexual problem.
Right.
Or that a sexual problem would come out of a diagnosis from a church official.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot at play here. He's not being sent to the Catholic Church, this institutionalized religion that's been around for 2 millennia. He's being sent to a relatively new one. Its real life equivalent, I don't like him, he's a pedophile, but Woody Allen once joked that this religion, he said, I would never belong to a religion that advertises in popular mechanics. So here he is at the First Church of Appliantology, and L. Ron Hoover, the guru himself, sits down and tells him, well, it's because you're secretly horny for robots.
Right.
And what you need to do is learn German and then go get yourself one.
And that's exactly what he does.
But I do want to point out something that's very bizarre about this world that Joe exists in. Music, illegal.
Robot sex.
Government-sanctioned robot sex with referrals given to you by a social worker at your nearest church of appliantology, totally okay.
And the appliances are owned by the state.
The appliances are owned by the state. Now, Stick It Out, the next song that comes, is Joe picking his date up from the bar. It's a funny tune. The first half of it is in German, and it's catchy.
Mm-hmm.
If you didn't know what the lyrics were, you would think you were listening to a pop hit.
You can Google them, though.
Then you hear it in English.
Yeah.
It's a verbatim translation, and it's pretty funny. When I first heard it, I was a sophomore in high school. I threw my head back in laughter. It caught me totally off guard.
It's so
I had
funny.
no idea what they were singing, and the fact that it followed up with it's following 2 minutes of pretty catchy. It's like a techno song almost. With bouncy beat. You have this. You can't tell what they're singing in German. They get to the English portion. It definitely catches you off guard.
And it's funny because it does sound like what a sex robot would say, because it's like so cold and repetitive. Like there's nothing like romantic or sweet about it. It's like extremely.
Well, that particular set of lyrics became known in Frank's conceptual continuity as American love poetry.
Nice.
And more specifically, those weren't just lyrics written for this song. Here we go. American love poetry. Featured in Shake Your Booty. Pick me, I'm clean. I'm also programmed for conversational English. Let's see. What's a girl like you doing in a place like this? Do you come here often? Wait a minute, I've got it. You're an Italian. What? You're Jewish? Love your nails. That's from the end of Dancing' Fool.
Right.
Love your nails.
Yeah.
You must be a Libra. Your place or mine. but it's delivered by this cold, callous robot. Cyborg is their date, and it's...
As a track,
what's your take?
As a track, like it's not my favorite. It might even be my least favorite on the whole album. It's just, it really drags.
It's forgettable.
Yeah.
And it's an 8.5-minute piece. Wonderful synthesizer solo from Peter Wolf. There is and yes, Aaron, yes, there is a lyrical reference to "Oh No" from Weasels Rip My Flesh. There are some cool little things in the tune itself. I will listen to it if I'm listening to Joe's Garage start to finish.
Yeah.
But if it ever comes up on the shuffle, I'm inclined to skip this one. What you need to know as far as the narrative goes is their sex act is consummated with a golden shower. The golden shower causes the little cyborg device to short circuit. And no, not that Peter Wolf. This Peter Wolf is German. Not to be confused with the Peter Wolf from the Jay Giles band.
So he breaks the sex robot.
So he pisses on Cyborg, and he goes on the fritz. The central scrutinizer shows up, and he and Joe are face-to-face for the only time in the story. And Joe is under arrest for destroying a state-owned sex bot.
So now Joe goes to jail.
And that is the end of Side A of Act 2. Act 2 is probably the hardest one to get through.
It is. It's really dragging.
Yeah. There's sort of an unspoken issue with Frank and his ability, or rather inability, to carry a narrative longer than 30 minutes. You get this with 200 Motels. You get this with Thingfish. Them or Us, the book, goes in 20 different directions. Joe's Garage, it just kind of drags in the middle. So after Cyborg, you flip the record over, and we get that Joe is in prison. Now, I said Frank. I almost said Frank. Reason being is the inspiration for Joe's time in prison, some of it comes a little bit from Frank's own stint in prison. We'll talk about that in just a second. It opens with Dong Work for Yuta. This is a stupid song.
It is a stupid song. I think it's just about gay sex.
This is a story about bald-headed John.
Non-consensual sex. So it's just like, okay, haha, we get it.
Right. So sometimes Frank doesn't succeed in his satire. I don't think. Ben Watson is welcome to disagree with me. I'm sure he would go to the mat for this song. But he does raise attention and awareness to what was a serious issue in 1979, and it remains one now. American prison conditions. The widespread use of rape as a tool to dominate and intimidate. The widespread usage of drugs. Just who really is incarcerated there.
I just feel like his view on it in the song isn't, like, I agree with you totally, like, he could have said something about it.
His knowledge and awareness of it.
Right, but he
doesn't share it in a way that's productive.
He's making it a joke.
Right, he gives it the South Park treatment.
Especially because then it leads into a song called Keep It Greasy, so it'll go down easy. Yeah. And it's like, you know, it's a really, like, snappy, fast, upbeat tune, and we're kind of like, you know, if you really, like, I totally get it. If you really wanted to, like, make a statement about it, I feel like there was maybe a better way to say, like, to at least portray that there were some negative thoughts surrounding it.
I wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah.
Another thing about these two songs is they were not meant to be part of this rock opera. Dong Work for Yuta was just some little jam that developed out of some band humor about John Smothers. John Smothers was Frank's bodyguard, hired in 1972 after Frank had been violently attacked by a fan in London. And John Smothers is a big, bald-headed black man. He looks like Mr. Clean, but dark-skinned. You can see him in the film Baby Snakes. He's wearing a red kimono. You see him backstage talking. He's got a unique accent. He's from someplace in the South, I think.
Okay.
I think Texas or Louisiana. And he talks about, like, this is the craziest lineup that Frank's ever had. And yeah, he's got this big, beautiful, bald, shiny head. And at the end of the show, Frank's getting close to fans. And if they got too close to him, John Smothers would whip out an asp, one of those collapsible batons. Sometimes maybe you've seen them out in the street. And wham, wham, puts it away, and people disengage. So That guy needs to write a book.
Yeah.
So it's just a song stripped of all the stuff about big dicks and weenies and mustard. It's just a little vamp on this guy, John Smothers, who talks funny. Terry Bozzio comes back to be the voice of John Smothers. Is it funny? Is it memorable?
Yeah, I can pass it.
Yeah. Keep It Greasy was a song that had been in the stage repertoire for about a year and a half. Stripped of context, it is a song about butt sex.
Right.
And specifically women on the receiving end of it. And whether or not it is a pleasurable or painful activity. And it's just another sex vamp like Dynamo Hum.
Right.
Here on this record, it's placed in an entirely different context where it's not about a sexual practice, but more about a survival tactic.
Right.
It takes on a completely disgusting connotation, while also, again, raising awareness of the conditions in our prison system, our prison industrial complex even. And then this side 4, ends with perhaps the only redeeming track from this 17-minute stretch of music, and that's Outside Now.
I love Outside Now. I think it's him sitting in prison, longing to be out of prison. It's just him kind of ruminating on his time there and why he's there,
and daydreaming
about music,
daydreaming of guitar solos that would cause the walls to come down and guarantee him his freedom.
Mm-hmm.
What can we? Oh, right. So Outside Now, we did talk about this because it's featured on Broadway the Hard Way.
That's right.
Now, between this version and the one on Broadway the Hard Way, the biggest difference is that this version fades out, a rarity in the Frank Zappa catalog. His songs do not fade out. You also have Vinnie Colaiuta as the drummer. Most of the time, I think he's a terrific drummer, but here, I think the song benefits from having a more solid, stoic beat, and Vinny's got a tendency to play around the beat.
I agree with that.
And there's a little too much of that going on there. It almost sounds like he's getting warmed up.
Definitely.
Beautiful vamp, though. Here's one thing that this has that the live version doesn't. Warren Cucurullo playing the electric sitar, playing the main riff on that. It's a beautiful sound. All right. So then we go into Act 3, and it opens with another long, rather meandering track.
Yeah, I don't care for this one.
He used to cut the grass. This is another one I skip over. And even if I'm listening to the album itself, it's Joe's out of jail. He's in a state of catatonia.
Mm-hmm.
He's traumatized by his time in jail. He's been raped, brutalized. Music's still illegal, so it's not like he has something to fall back on.
He has nothing, right.
Right.
And it's really just his neighbor kind of commenting on, like, oh, he used to be such a nice kid and cut the grass for us. But it's really...
How many times have we heard that about people who were pushed towards acts of madness and insanity?
Right.
Like they used to be nice, and then...
Yeah, they used to be such a good kid.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
It's a common trope.
Agreed.
Now, if the last 20 minutes of music here drag a bit, and I think they do. You can easily make a one-disc redux of Joe's Garage and have a very tight listen. It's all made up for by the next track, which the song is Packard Goose.
Packard Goose is my favorite song of the album.
Packard Goose is one of my all-time favorite Zappa songs. It's the core of Zappa's philosophy. There's a lot to get into here.
I love that he's talking about music critics.
Right. So in the context of the narrative, Joe is in this catatonic existence, and he is imagining himself in this delusion he has that he's still a rock star and that he's famous, and he's having to respond to the critics of his imaginary albums. What we get is Packard Goose, which is his take on if he were a rock star, what would his response be to the previous world? And in it, he lambasts the music press, the music industry. Oh no, you gotta go. Who do you write for? I want to know. I believe you is the government's whore, and keeping people dumb is where you're coming from.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't even need commentary, does it?
Frank hated music critics, and I think he thought they were just the worst kind of trash, and this was a really good way for him to express that. People
who can't write, who speak to people who can't talk, and write articles for people who can't read. Yep. That was what Frank said about rock journalists. For some reason, Rolling Stone magazine, even now, does not really lay on the frosting when they talk about him.
Yeah.
It was a legendary hatred. Now, Packard Goose has some of Frank's best moments lyrically, and I have to respectfully disagree with our friend Arthur Barrow. He rued the fact that Packard Goose, when they finally did it in the studio, that how they had been doing it live, the middle portion spoken by Mary was originally spoken by the band in unison, like an oath or a pledge. That must have felt powerful.
Right.
The oath itself. Information is not knowledge. Knowledge is not wisdom. Wisdom is not truth. Truth is not beauty. Beauty is not love. Love is not music. Music is the best. Every time I say it, it's like saying Hare Krishna.
Yeah.
It puts a smile on my face. It is Frank's essence distilled into an Upanishad, a psalm, 8 lines right there. And on the record, he has Mary say it in her. Can I get your best Staten Island accent?
Is it Staten Island or is it Boston?
Does it matter? You're stalling. Can I just hear information is not knowledge in your best New York accent?
Information is not knowledge. There you go.
Yep. And indeed, music is the best.
Music is the best.
Music is the best was Frank's signature. Gail used it as her signature in her emails. It's a central phrase to Frank's work. And this song, I would say, is a crucial component. Really, I would say it's the Rosetta Stone to Frank's entire philosophy. And then when you put it in this narrative, it's little more than Joe's daydream about himself responding to his critics. And yet, stripped of context, it's a 32-ton weight.
And speaking of daydream, the next track is him daydreaming
Tragic.
Of the world's best guitar solo, which is Watermelon and Easter Hay, which is another amazing track. This last side really does redeem, I think.
Act 3 makes up for Act 2.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So you have Watermelon and Easter Hay, which is just this monster guitar song. And it's supposed to be Joe daydreaming about if he was to make a, one last amazing song.
It reminds me of Eleanor Rigby writing the words to a sermon no one will hear. Here he is sitting there and, rehearsing this guitar solo that no one will ever hear. And it's so tragic. It is. He plays it and then he's done. It's his retirement internally as a rock star. What I love about it is that here on the record, as the central scrutinizer is introducing this final guitar solo, Frank, in character, bungles his line.
Right.
He cracks himself up saying, and really, who gives a fuck anyway? and then he tries to keep going. And he says, oh, hold on, stop. And you hear him, still with the megaphone on, laughing in the background as the song is beginning to pick up and start. And this goes back to the whole idea of Frank pouring vinegar on his fruit salad.
Yep.
He can't have it be too beautiful. It can't be too sentimental.
It has to have some kind of crack up.
It is a stroke of artistic genius. There's the only parallel I can think of is in the Charlie Chaplin film City Lights. The scene when the tramp realizes that the flower girl is blind. She's at the fountain. She's filling her thing with water. And it's a silent film, but he's sitting there, he's just looking at her and realizing, because she's staring off into oblivion, he was realizing that she can't see. And then he just sits and he starts to admire her. And he realizes he's falling in love with her while also recognizing she's blind. And then right as you settle into the sentiment of the scene, the flower girl, completely oblivious to the tramp being there, takes the water and splash right in his face. Just completely pulls you out of the moment. Frank couldn't let you feel too good listening to one of his records. And I say that because I do draw comparisons between him and Chaplin and Eisenstein as far as being true masters of the form.
Yeah.
Now, so we have this beautiful solo along with Zoot Allures and Black Napkins. Frank wanted this to be put to rest along with him as his signature tunes, never to be covered by anybody else. Unless you're Dweezil, then you can do whatever you want. But his signature tunes, and I would say if the English language died tomorrow and we had to preserve Frank's legacy with music, those would easily be the 3 tracks
Definitely.
I would pick. What is your take on that song?
On Watermelon Easter Hay.
On Watermelon and Easter Hay.
So beautiful.
We've talked about a lot of his guitar solos. Where does that one rank for you? That's a lot of people's favorites.
It's up in my, I would say, top 3 for sure. It's amazing. I love that he chooses it to close this out. I love that that's the direction that he went with, was to use a guitar solo, to use kind of a musical like epilogue, if you can call it that. That's how he closes out, that Joe is just dreaming of this monster guitar solo, and this is exactly what he puts on the record. And then it closes out in the saddest way.
One last thing about Watermelon and Easter Hay, then we'll go on to the final track. I've heard from multiple sources that in his final weeks, in his final years, when he was terminally ill with prostate cancer, Frank was known to put this song on alone, and he would just listen to it in solitude. And for a guy who avoided sentimentality, any shred of that as it relates to him is worth celebrating.
Right.
And it means that this song clearly meant a lot to him. And
agreed.
And it brings a tear to my eye sometimes too. It's a beautiful track. One of my favorites. Then we get the epilogue.
Yeah, so Little Green Rosetta is the end of the story, and
what does the story bring us to? Where's Joe at?
So Joe is now working in a factory, which is extremely depressing.
Joe is now an assembly line worker at the Utility Muffin Research Kitchen, and it is his daily role to squirt a little green rosetta on top of a muffin.
Right.
Something we discovered as we listened to the song musically. What was it we pointed out as we were listening to it? So
it's that the song is very repetitive. They say over and over again, a little green rosetta, and it's kind of reminiscent of that he's on this factory line and he's just like squirting icing, and then the next one comes and he's squirting icing, and the next one comes and he's squirting icing. And that it's almost like this repetitive chant. And it reminded us of like a field song that you would have heard people singing when they were working in the fields against their own will. It's even paced in the same tempo as like any of those old spirituals you'd hear, Pick a Bale of Cotton, whatever. A little green rosetta. I'm picturing one of those caulking guns filled with icing. Yeah. A little green rosetta. Da-da. And exactly. Like that's his life. He's standing on the assembly line and just that's the music in his life now is the sound of the sound of the assembly line. An assembly line worker. As it cranks along. And he's frosting muffins. For who? An assembly line of muffins. Yep. Forever. It's a very bleak ending. I'd say it's right up there with the end of Preservation Act 2 by the Kinks, where everyone becomes robots. Agreed. And then it ends with some Zappa silliness as like the master of ceremonies. Yeah. Talking about calling Vinnie Colaiuta Steve Gadd's clone. It's a reference to the fact that Vinnie Colaiuta would go on to take a gig to become the next Steve Gadd as a session drummer. Do you think it's supposed to be him snapping us back into reality? Like, why do you think he chose to end? I mean, the story ends so sad, the story of Joe, and so sadly. So maybe he's trying to like snap us out of that a little bit. I'm not sure. Well, let's see what the man has to say about it. He does say somewhere that this is meant to be like a morality play. Mm-hmm. Here we go. It's sort of like a really cheap kind of high school play, the way it might have been done 20 years ago with all the sets made out of cardboard boxes and poster paint. So he wants it to be seen as like a morality play, like something, this could happen to you, like Reefer Madness or something. Right. Like, this is what happens if you get into some this creepy force called music. Mm-hmm. It does kind of play like a after school special a little bit. The aggressive totalitarianism presented on this album makes this, I would say, one of the most important works of subversive art this side of Battleship Potemkin. And I'm not even minimizing it. I'm serious about how important this is as a work of art
for every generation to hear who is interested in subversion, counterintelligence, resistance, standing up to dictatorships, using art as a form of resistance. This is something to listen to. This is a crucial piece.
Agreed.
And for no reason other than Frank's own political sense, as depicted, as Aaron is saying in the comments, it can't happen here. Exactly. Frank started with it can't happen here, and the political philosophy expounded upon in Joe's Garage. The political philosophy on Joe's Garage is summed up with this horrific dystopian poem that's in Acts 2 and 3. That's one reason why I wish I had it on vinyl. And think about how this applies to 21st century America, or wherever you are if you're watching this, as this is a global platform for now. Eventually, it was discovered that God did not want us all to be the same. This was bad news for the government of the world, as it seemed contrary to the doctrine of portion-controlled servings. Mankind must be made more uniformly if the future was going to work. Various ways were sought to bind us all together, but alas, sameness was unenforceable. It was about this time that someone came up with the idea of total criminalization, based on the principle that if we were all crooks, we could at last be uniform to some degree in the eyes of the law. Shrewdly, our legislators calculated that most people were too lazy to perform a real crime, so new laws were manufactured, making it possible for anyone to violate them any time of the day or night. And once we had all broken some kind of law, we'd all be in the same big, happy club. Right up there with the president, the most exalted industrialists, and the clerical big shots of all your favorite religions. Total criminalization was the greatest idea of its time and was vastly popular, except with those people who didn't want to be crooks or outlaws. So, of course, they had to be tricked into it, which is one of the reasons why music was eventually made illegal. If everybody's guilty of something, everyone's a criminal. And if everyone's a criminal, everyone can be controlled.
Yeah.
Given the heaviness of this and Broadway the Hard Way, I know exactly which album we're going to do tomorrow. It'll be a surprise. All right, we got some good comments here. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Food Gathering in Post-Industrial America, 1992. Yes, so Aaron mentioned in the comments that this sounds like some latter-day Zappa, specifically a piece from The Yellow Shark. Absolutely. I would say that Joe's Garage is the beginning of that late-stage cynicism that Zappa had, where it's not cynical for the sake of being cynical. He's not being an asshole. It's cynicism for the sake of saying, this is how bad things are, and this is how bad things are going to get. He kept the rose-tinted glasses off and kept the magic glasses on.
Yep.
Now, when I say the magic glasses, and perhaps this is a good way to end. We'll end talking about the magic glasses concept. Magic glasses is a concept that I heard from Dick Gregory. And he says that when you put on the magic glasses, there's 3 responsibilities that come with them. 1, you can never take them off. 2, you will only see things as they are, never as how they're meant to be. And 3, you can never force anyone else to wear them. Frank had those glasses. It's through those lenses that he looked at the world. And for the first time, really, we see it uninterrupted on Joe's Garage. It's a crucial, important work. Everyone needs to hear it. Dick Gregory did run for president in 1968. He accidentally got a lot of votes because the machine was hacked the wrong way. It's a long story for another time, though. So, I'm going to wrap up. Do you have any parting thoughts on Joe's Garage? We covered so much material. I wrote some notes over on the sideboard here. Do you think we covered everything?
I do. Yep. I think this is one of his most important works. It's incredibly subversive. I think it spoke to how truly intelligent and woke he really was.
Mm-hmm.
And it's recommended listening for sure.
All right. I've got maybe like 3 more minutes of stuff I want to say if you're done.
Go for it.
All right. So Joe's Garage.
Do you want me to sign off?
Yeah, this is just boring, like factual stuff.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
So those songs that sound a bit disjointed, especially on Acts 2 and 3, what I learned about Joe's Garage as a whole is that the new stuff is on Act 1. Everything else is pretty old. In fact, The Central Scrutinizer is a remake of My Guitar Wants to Kill Your Mama. Joe's Garage was meant to be that little history of music. Catholic Girls, or the remake of My Guitar, was meant to be the B-side. Again, Catholic Girls conceived as a response to the criticism levied at Jewish Princess. Cruise Slut was an old tune, just one of those nasty, sexy tunes that he had been doing since 77, 78. Kind of like Titties and Beer, kind of like Find Her Finer. These are the songs from that period. And cobbled together to all be part of the narrative. Every single one of those songs became cobbled together to be part of the narrative. Stick It Out, the song about the robot sex, that goes as far back as the Flo and Eddie days. A Token of My Extreme goes back to the Roxy days. Several of these tracks were essentially jams or existed only to be vehicles for these guitar solos to be dubbed in. So that is also a testament to Frank's genius as an orchestrator, as an engineer, and as a producer, that he could cobble together 3 acts of a rock opera, not by sitting down and writing it out, but by taking pre-existing songs and stringing together a narrative through those separate component parts. That concept itself is straight out of Dada, the idea of repurposing pre-existing work, or maybe even some situationist type thinking. Anyway, Joe's Garage is a crucial piece of subversive art. Anyone who's interested in resistance, anyone who's interested in studying autocracy and how dictatorships work, should read the liner notes and look through the art. It's a brilliant work. We'll be back tomorrow. We're going to do Absolutely Free. It's album number 2. All right. Thank you. Have a happy Zappadan. And for real, lots of conceptual continuity here for sure. And inspired by the illegalization of music in Iran. All right. Happy Zappadan, folks. We'll see you tomorrow.